Here's the problem for you guys. The Border Patrol Union came out and the acting CBP chief both came out and said it's not perfect, but this is the best thing we've seen in decades. So are Republicans going to say that the Border Patrol Union and the acting CBP chief are wrong?
Well, look, they can have their perspective, Steve, and we've got a lot of respect.
It's their jobs, Tom.
Well, and it's our job to actually make sure the laws will accomplish what we're seeking to do.
Dear God, they've lost Ducey. So look, that was Tom Emmer being like, oh, the Border Patrol, they can have their perspective or whatever, which you might think, well, that seems kind of disrespectful of a group that you Republicans have always pretended to worship, but that ain't disrespectful. This is disrespectful.
The Border Patrol Union has come out and said the bill is better than the status quo. Does that affect your thinking on this?
Well, I think it does have something to do with the pay structure that's in the bill. I understand that they're desperate for measures that will assist, okay?
I don't know if you heard at the end, but she laughed when the Speaker of the House was like, oh yeah, the Border Patrol loves this bill. They just want to get paid, which is ridiculous of them. I definitely think. By the way, remember, the Republicans would have you believe that we're facing a literal invasion at the border from tons of men, military age men who are flooding across the border. They're dangerous. They're big, strong men, massive hands. And the Border Patrol not only says that they like this bill, but that they want to be paid to do the job that you're describing as something that normally is only done by like Marvel superheroes. And you think that's quaint? That was one of the most elitist things I think I've ever seen from the Speaker. And Laura Ingraham thought it was just hilarious. But anyway, to be clear, the Border Patrol has come out in favor of this bill. It represents the Border Patrol Council, effectively the union for Border Patrol, represents more than 18,000 agents. And it said that the bill would, quote, drop illegal border crossings nationwide and will allow our agents to get back to detecting and apprehending those who want to cross our border illegally and evade apprehension. Now, here is the thing. They, considering what they have said about the border and Border Patrol over the decades, kinda have to respect that. The rest of us are not necessarily under any obligation to assume that that is the only perspective that matters, but that's certainly how the right has acted up until recently. But the idea that they would turn against this union should not come as a surprise. Sure, it's law enforcement, but it's also a union. And right-wingers hate unions, so much so that they're willing to do things like, and I will remind you, what Donald Trump did about a month ago. Remember when the UAW endorsed Joe Biden and Trump wanted to pretend that he had union support? So he literally paid $20,000 to rent a plant that he filled up with people who not only were not union auto workers, despite holding up signs implying that they were, many of them weren't auto workers at all. It was effectively just like what he did when he initially came down the escalator in 2015. They were actors that he had paid to pretend to support him. So the right doesn't care at all about the Border Patrol Union or what they think about this bill. Sabrina, I'm curious about your thoughts about both the substance and the politics of this and how the right is dealing with their seeming hypocrisy on this topic.
Well, I think the fact that this bill has bipartisan support from leadership is already kind of like a red flag for many people. I'm not surprised that Border Patrol wants more funding to do the job, that they're doing. I personally am not a fan of this bill at all. But I'm not surprised, union or not. I personally don't even think that Border Patrol workers should have a union. I think that unions are meant for workers who individually, they don't have a lot of power. And so they need, that collective support for bargaining purposes, where if you work Border Patrol, you do have a lot of power over people's lives. So union or no union, of course, they're going to want more money for themselves to do their job.
Yeah, look, I'm not necessarily going to just take every single thing that people in working in law enforcement are going to say about their job. But that said, like even if they weren't being told to shoot migrants in the leg or I don't know, feed the alligators in the moat or something, it's still a job. They should be able to, I think they should be able to advocate for themselves, and maybe that could be a component of this bill. But I am glad that you pointed out your personal opposition to it, I realized as I was prepping for today's show, and I'll try to keep this brief, I've been so focused on the hypocrisy of the right that I'm not entirely sure whether I've made clear what I think about this bill on the show. And I guess that's probably how it should be. At the end of the day, what I think about this bill is largely irrelevant. But yeah, I agree with the progressive critique of the bill, and we could go through. AOC is coming out against it, a number of other progressives as well. It is ridiculous for the right to oppose the bill because it's been written to cater to them. That does not mean that it's awesome. So I just want to be very clear about that. And we can have a conversation about whether, even if it's bad or bad specifically for migrants, it could be in like Joe Biden's political interests to pass it so that he's seen to be doing something. Or maybe it would actually accomplish something. It would maybe massively cut down on people crossing the border, but in a way that is horrendous and violates people's human rights. These are all interesting conversations. That doesn't mean that I love the components of the bill. Again, it was written for right-wingers by right-wingers predominantly.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.